The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trail as Mary walked the final mile toward the Double R Ranch. Her old boots, worn thin from months of walking from place to place looking for work, kicked up small clouds of dirt with each step. The leather had cracked in several places, and she could feel the heat of the ground through the thin soles. Her dress, once a cheerful blue, had faded to a dull gray from too many washings in creek water and too much sun. She paused at the top of a small hill and looked down at the ranch spread out below her. It was bigger than she had expected. Wooden fences stretched out in all directions, creating pastures where cattle grazed lazily in whatever shade they could find. The main house was a solid 2-story building with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and sides. Several barns and smaller buildings dotted the property, and she could see men working with horses in a corral near the biggest barn. Mary took a deep breath and adjusted the worn shawl around her shoulders. It had been her mother's, one of the few things she had left from her old life. 3 months ago, she had been Mary Patterson, wife of a hard-working miner, living in a small but comfortable cabin on the outskirts of Copper Creek. Now she was just another widow with empty pockets and nowhere to go. The memory of that terrible day still haunted her. Tom had left for the mine that morning just like any other day. He had kissed her goodbye and promised to bring home his pay at the end of the week. She had been planning to surprise him with his favorite apple pie when he got home. Instead, the mine foreman had come to her door with his hat in his hands and that look on his face that she would never forget. The cave-in had happened without warning. Tom and 2 other men had been trapped so deep that it took 3 days to reach them. By then it was too late. The mine owner had given her $20 in his condolences, but $20 didn't last long when you had rent to pay and food to buy and a funeral to arrange. Mary had tried everything she could think of to make ends meet. She had taken in washing and mending, cleaned houses for the few families in town who could afford help, and even tried to sell the vegetables from her small garden. But work was scarce in Copper Creek, especially for a woman on her own. The other widows in town were already doing the same jobs she was trying to get, and there simply wasn't enough work to go around. The bank manager, Mr. Hendricks, had been patient at first. He had known Tom and respected him as a hard worker who always paid his debts on time. But patience only lasted so long, and last week he had given Mary her final warning. She had until the end of the month to pay what she owed, or she would lose the cabin. The cabin wasn't much, but it was home. It was where she and Tom had planned to raise their children, where they had spent their wedding night, where she could still sometimes catch a faint scent of his tobacco on quiet evenings. Losing it would mean losing the last connection she had to the life they had built together. That's when she had heard about Bull Harrison and the Double R Ranch. Old Pete at the general store had mentioned that Harrison sometimes hired drifters and folks down on their luck, no questions asked. The pay wasn't great, Pete had said, but it was steady work for anyone willing to do it. The ranch was a hard day's ride from town, but Mary didn't have money for a horse. She had walked, sleeping under the stars and washing in streams along the way. Now, looking down at the ranch, she felt a mixture of hope and fear churning in her stomach. This was her last chance. She had exactly $3.27 left to her name, not even enough for a room at the cheapest boarding house back in town. If Bull Harrison wouldn't hire her, she didn't know what she would do. Mary straightened her shoulders and started down the hill toward the ranch. As she got closer, she could see that it was a working ranch with all the signs of a successful operation. The fences were in good repair, the buildings looked solid and well-maintained, and the cattle she could see appeared healthy and well-fed. This gave her hope that perhaps the ranch owner could afford to hire another worker. She reached the main gate, which stood open during the day to allow the ranch hands to come and go. A wooden sign hung above the entrance with Double R Ranch burned into the wood in bold letters. Mary paused there, suddenly nervous about what she was going to say. She had practiced her speech during the long walk, but now that she was actually here, the words seemed to have fled from her mind. The sound of hammering came from one of the barns, and she could hear men's voices calling to each other as they worked. Chickens scratched in the dirt near what looked like the cookhouse, and a dog lying in the shade of the porch lifted its head to look at her with mild curiosity, before settling back down for its nap. Mary walked up the dirt path toward the main house, her heart beating faster with each step. She had almost reached the porch when a man emerged from the largest barn, wiping his hands on a dirty rag. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with brown hair that needed cutting and a face weathered by years of working outdoors. His clothes were practical work clothes, sturdy pants and a shirt with the sleeves rolled up to show strong forearms. This had to be Bull Harrison. Mary had heard descriptions of him in town, and this man matched what people had told her. He was probably in his late 30s, with the kind of build that came from doing physical work every day of his life. There was something about the way he carried himself that suggested he was used to being in charge and making decisions. Bull Harrison looked up and saw her standing there. His expression was neutral, neither welcoming nor unfriendly, just the look of a man who was used to strangers showing up at his ranch. He walked toward her with a steady, purposeful stride, and Mary felt her nervousness increase. "Help you with something, ma'am?" His voice was deep and had a slight roughness to it, like someone who spent more time talking to horses and cattle than to people. Mary cleared her throat and tried to remember the speech she had practiced. "Mr. Harrison? I'm Mary Patterson. I've come from Copper Creek looking for work." Bull Harrison stopped a few feet away from her and looked her over from head to toe. It wasn't an insulting look, more like the way he might examine a horse he was thinking of buying. He was clearly taking note of her worn clothes and tired appearance, trying to figure out what her story was. "Work, you said?" He pushed his hat back a little on his head. "What kind of work you looking for, Mrs. Patterson?" "Anything you might have, sir. I can cook and clean, mend clothes, tend to sick animals if needed. I grew up on a small ranch before I married, so I know my way around. Livestock. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I don't eat much." The last part sounded pathetic even to her own ears, but it was true. She had been eating as little as possible to make her small amount of money last longer. Bull Harrison was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Mary tried to stand straighter and look more capable than she felt. She could see him weighing something in his mind, and she held her breath waiting for his answer. "Times are hard all over," he said finally. "I've got all the regular hands I need right now. Most folks coming through here looking for work I have to turn away." Mary's heart sank. She had been so focused on getting to the ranch that she hadn't really prepared herself for the possibility that there simply might not be any work available. "I understand, sir. I just thought I had to try." She started to turn away, not sure where she would go next when Bull Harrison spoke again. "Hold on there, Mrs. Patterson. I didn't say I couldn't use you. I said I don't need regular hands, but I might have something else if you're desperate enough." Mary turned back to face him, hope flickering in her chest again. "I'm listening, sir." Bull Harrison glanced toward the house, then back at her. There was something different in his expression now, something that made Mary feel slightly uneasy. Not threatened exactly, but like she was about to hear something she wasn't expecting. "How desperate are you, Mrs. Patterson? How bad do you need money?" The question caught her off guard. "Very desperate, sir. I'm about to lose everything I have left. This ranch is my last hope, and you'd be willing to do just about anything for enough money to get back on your feet?" Mary hesitated. There was something in the way he asked the question that made her think he wasn't talking about cooking or cleaning anymore. "I'm not sure what you mean, sir." Bull Harrison looked at her for another long moment, then seemed to make up his mind about something. "Mrs. Patterson, I've got a business problem that needs solving, and you might be exactly what I need to solve it. But it's not the kind of work you're probably expecting." "What kind of work is it?" "The kind that would require you to be my wife for one night." Mary stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I beg your pardon?" "I need a wife, Mrs. Patterson, just temporarily, just long enough to convince a man named Vincent Caldwell that I'm the kind of settled family man he wants to do business with. One night, that's all. A legal marriage, but not a real one, if you understand what I'm saying." Mary felt her face growing hot. "Mr. Harrison, I don't think I understand what you're suggesting." "I'm suggesting a business arrangement. You need money, and I need a wife to help me close a land deal. We get married this evening, meet with Caldwell tomorrow morning, and then we can quietly annul the whole thing. You get enough money to pay your debts and start over, and I get the land." "Ine." Bull Harrison nodded once. a quick businesslike motion that somehow made Mary feel both relieved and more nervous at the same time. Good. Come up to the house then, and we'll work out the details. As they walked toward the main house, Mary noticed things she had missed before. The porch had been recently swept, and someone had taken care to plant flowers in wooden boxes along the railings. The windows were clean and had curtains that looked like they had been made by someone who knew what they were doing. It wasn't the kind of bachelor establishment she had expected. "You keep a nice place, Mr. Harrison," she said, mostly to fill the silence. "My sister used to live here," he replied. "She moved to San Francisco last year when she got married. Haven't had time to change much since then." That explained the feminine touches around the house. Mary wondered what Bull Harrison's sister would think of her brother's current plan to solve his business problems. Probably nothing good. Bull opened the front door and held it for her, which surprised her a little. She had expected him to be rougher around the edges, but he had manners when he chose to use them. The inside of the house was as well kept as the outside. The front room had comfortable furniture and a stone fireplace with books on shelves and a few pictures on the walls. It felt like a real home, not just a place where someone slept between working days. "Sit down, Mrs. Patterson. Can I get you some water? You look like you've been traveling." "Water would be wonderful, thank you." Mary settled into one of the chairs and tried not to let her relief at finally sitting down show too much. Her feet were aching, and she was more tired than she wanted to admit. Bull disappeared into what she assumed was the kitchen and returned a few minutes later with a glass of cool water and a plate with some bread and cheese on it. "Thought you might be hungry too." Mary wanted to refuse the food to maintain some dignity, but the truth was she hadn't eaten anything since yesterday morning, and her stomach was making embarrassing noises. "That's very kind of you." She ate, slowly, trying not to seem too eager, while Bull settled into the chair across from her. Now that they were inside and sitting down, the whole situation felt even more surreal. Here she was, sharing a meal with a man she had met 20 minutes ago, discussing entering into a fake marriage with him. "Tell me about this land deal," she said when she had finished eating. "Why is it so important?" Bull leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a moment, like he was trying to decide how much to tell her. "This ranch has been in my family for 15 years. My father started it with nothing but determination and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. When he died 5 years ago, he left it to me and my sister. It seems like you've done well with it. We've had good years and bad years. Last year was particularly bad. We lost a lot of cattle in a drought, and I had to take out loans to keep the operation going. The bank has been patient, but their patience is running out." Mary understood that feeling all too well. "And this land you want to buy would help with the water problem?" "It's not just about buying it. Vincent Caldwell owns a piece of property that borders mine to the north. There's a year-round spring on that land, and the creek that runs through, it flows right through the best grazing land on my ranch. If I could buy that property, I'd have enough water to expand the herd and never have to worry about drought years again." "And Mr. Caldwell won't sell to unmarried men?" Bull made a sound that might have been a laugh, but there wasn't much humor in it. "Caldwell made his fortune in cattle and land deals, but somewhere along the way, he got some fixed ideas about the kinds of people he wants to do business with. He thinks married men are more stable, more likely to take care of the land properly, less likely to sell out and move on when times get tough. Is he wrong about that?" "Maybe not entirely, but I've been taking care of this land for 5 years and I'm not going anywhere. Problem is, convincing him of that has been impossible. I've tried to arrange meetings with him 3 times in the past year, and each time his people have told me he's only interested in dealing with established family men." Mary set down her empty glass and looked at Bull more carefully. He was clearly frustrated by the situation, but there was something else in his expression that she couldn't quite identify. "Have you considered actually getting married? I mean, for real?" "To who?" "The nearest town with unmarried women is a 2-day ride from here, and I don't have time to go courting. Besides, marriage is—" He stopped and shook his head. "That's not the kind of thing you rush into just to solve a business problem." There was pain in his voice when he mentioned marriage, and Mary wondered if there was more to his story than he was telling her. But that wasn't her business. She had her own problems to solve. So your plan is to convince Mr. Caldwell that we're really married? The plan is to be really married, at least legally. Caldwell is nobody's fool. If he thought we were trying to trick him, he'd never do business with us. But if we're actually married, even if it's temporary, then we're not lying to him. Mary had to admit there was a certain logic to it, even if the whole thing still seemed crazy. And you think one day will be enough to convince him? Caldwell is coming here tomorrow to look over the ranch and meet with me about the sale. If he sees that I have a wife, and if we can convince him that it's a stable marriage, I think he'll be satisfied. He's not going to stick around long enough to figure out that we just met today. What if he asks questions about our marriage? About how we met? How long we've been married, things like that? Bull had clearly thought about this already. We'll need to come up with a story that makes sense, something simple that we can both remember. Maybe we could say you're a widow from back east who came out here to start over, and we met when you answered an advertisement for a housekeeper. Mary considered this. That's close enough to the truth to be believable. But what about after Mr. Caldwell leaves? How do we end the marriage without it looking suspicious? As far as anyone in town knows, you'll just be my wife who decided ranch life wasn't for her. You can go back east or to California or wherever you want to go. In a few months, I can quietly file for an annulment, claiming the marriage was never properly consummated. Mary felt her face grow warm at the mention of consummation, but she forced herself to think practically about the situation. And you're sure this is legal? We won't get in trouble for fraud or anything like that? We're not defrauding anyone. We'll be legally married when we meet with Caldwell. What we do after that is between us. Mary stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch yard where men were still working despite the heat of the afternoon. It was a good operation. She could see that. Bull Harrison had clearly worked hard to build something here, and it would be a shame for him to lose it because of one stubborn buyer's prejudices. At the same time, she was asking herself what Tom would think of all this. Would he understand that she was just trying to survive? Would he forgive her for marrying another man, even temporarily, even just for the money she desperately needed? Mrs. Patterson, Bull said quietly from behind her. I know this is a lot to ask. If you're not comfortable with it, I understand. I can give you a few dollars for food and a place to sleep tonight, and you can be on your way in the morning. Mary turned around to look at him. There was no pressure in his voice, no attempt to talk her into something she didn't want to do. That made her trust him a little more. It's not that I'm not comfortable with it exactly, it's just, this wasn't what I expected when I came here looking for work. I imagine not. But sometimes life doesn't give us the choices we want. Sometimes we have to make the best of whatever choices we have. That was certainly true. 3 months ago, Mary had thought. She knew what her life was going to look like. She and Tom would work hard, save money, maybe eventually have children and expand their little cabin. Now she was standing in a stranger's house discussing a fake marriage because she had nowhere else to turn. The $100, she said. When would I get it? Half tonight after the ceremony. The other half after Caldwell leaves tomorrow and the deal is complete. And if something goes wrong? If he doesn't buy the land or if he figures out what we're doing? You still get the $50 for going through with the ceremony. The rest depends on whether the land deal goes through. That seemed fair. Even $50 would be enough to pay her most pressing debts and give her time to figure out what to do next. Where would the ceremony take place? There's a preacher in town, but that would mean a lot of people knowing about it. I was thinking, we could have Brother Samuel from the mission perform it here at the ranch. He's discreet and he owes me a favor. Mary nodded. A quiet ceremony made more sense if they were planning to end the marriage quickly. And my room? You said I'd have my own room? My sister's old room is ready. Clean sheets, everything you'd need. You'd have complete privacy. Bull Harrison was being careful to address every concern she might have, which made her feel a little better about the whole arrangement. He seemed to understand that this was difficult for her and wasn't trying to take advantage of her desperate situation any more than necessary. All right, Mary said finally. I'll do it. But I want the terms written down, like you mentioned before, just so we're both clear on. Mary washed her face and hands in the clean water Bull had provided, then opened the wardrobe to look through his sister's abandoned clothes. Most of them were too fancy for ranch life, but she found a simple blue dress that looked like it might fit her. It was made of good material and had been well cared for, much nicer than anything she had owned in months. She changed into the dress, surprised to find that it fit reasonably well. Bull's sister must have been about her size. Looking at herself in the mirror, Mary hardly recognized the woman staring back at her. The dress brought out the color of her eyes and made her look less like a desperate wanderer and more like someone who belonged in a nice house. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Mary, Brother Samuel is here." Mary took a deep breath and smoothed down the skirt of the borrowed dress. "I'll be right down." When she came downstairs, she found Bull waiting in the front room with an elderly man in simple dark clothes. The preacher was thin and weathered, with kind eyes and hands that showed he was no stranger to hard work. "Brother Samuel, this is Mary Patterson," Bull said. "Mary, Brother Samuel runs the mission about 10 miles north of here." "Pleased to meet you, ma'am," the preacher said, tipping his hat. "William tells me you two want to get married this evening." "Yes, sir," Mary replied, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "It's a bit unusual having a wedding on such short notice, but I understand there are circumstances that make it necessary." Brother Samuel looked between them with curious, but not unfriendly eyes. "Have you two known each other long?" Mary glanced at Bull, wondering how they should answer this question. They hadn't had time to work out all the details of their story yet. "We've been corresponding for several months," Bull said smoothly. "Mary answered an advertisement I placed for a housekeeper, and over time our letters became more personal. She finally decided to come out from back east to see if we might suit each other." "And you've decided you do suit each other?" "Yes, sir," Mary said, trying to sound convincing. "William has been very kind to me, and I think we could have a good life together." Brother Samuel nodded approvingly. "It's wise to take time to get to know each other, even through letters. Too many folks rush into marriage without really understanding what they're getting into. William, I've known you since you were a boy, and I think you've chosen well." Bull looked slightly uncomfortable with the praise, but he managed a smile. "Thank you, Brother Samuel. That means a lot coming from you." "Well then, shall we get on with it? I assume you want to keep this simple?" "Yes, sir. Just the basic ceremony." Brother Samuel opened his worn Bible and looked around the room. "This is a fine place for a wedding. Let me just move this chair so we have room to stand properly." As the preacher arranged the furniture, Bull moved closer to Mary and spoke quietly in her ear. "Are you ready for this?" Mary nodded, though her heart was beating so fast she thought everyone in the room must be able to hear it. "As ready as I'll ever be. Remember, this is just business. Don't let yourself feel guilty about it." But even as he said the words, Mary noticed that Bull seemed as nervous as she was. His hands were slightly shaky, and he kept adjusting his collar like it was too tight. Brother Samuel cleared his throat and opened his Bible to the appropriate page. "William Harrison and Mary Patterson, please join hands and face each other." Mary looked up into Bull's eyes as she took his hands. They were calloused from years of ranch work, but surprisingly gentle. She realized this was the first time she had really looked directly at him, and she was struck by how serious and honest his expression was. Whatever else this marriage was, he wasn't treating it as a joke. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony," Brother Samuel began in his strong, clear voice. "Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but with careful consideration and a full understanding of the commitment being made." As the familiar words washed over her, Mary found herself thinking about her first wedding. She had been so young then, barely 19, and so completely in love with Tom that she could hardly believe he wanted to marry her. That ceremony had taken place in the little church back home, with both their families present and a celebration afterward that lasted late into the night. This was different in every possible way, but somehow the words still carried weight. When Brother Samuel asked if she took William to be her husband, her voice was steady as she said, "I do." And when Bull repeated the same vows, she found herself believing that he meant them, at least for tonight. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. William, you may kiss your bride." Mary's eyes widened slightly. They hadn't discussed this part. Bull looked as surprised as she was, but after a moment's hesitation, he leaned down and kissed her gently on the lips. It was brief and chaste, but it sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Harrison," Brother Samuel said with a warm smile. "May God bless your union." As they signed the marriage certificate, Mary's hand trembled slightly when she wrote her new name, Mary Harrison. It looked strange on, i.e., the paper, like it belonged to someone else. After Brother Samuel left with his payment for the ceremony, Bull and Mary found themselves alone in the front room, officially married, and suddenly unsure what to say to each other. "Well," Bull said finally, "that's done." "Yes, it is." Mary looked down at the simple gold band Bull had placed on her finger during the ceremony. She didn't know where he had gotten it on such short notice, but it fit perfectly. "Are you hungry? I could make us some dinner. You cook?" "Basic things. I've been living alone for a year, so I've had to learn." Bull seemed to be making an effort to keep things normal, to treat this like any other evening. "I could cook if you'd like. I'm actually quite good at it." "That would be nice. The kitchen is through here." Bull's kitchen was well equipped, but clearly hadn't been used for anything fancy in a long time. Mary found the ingredients for a simple but satisfying meal and set to work while Bull sat at the kitchen table and watched her. "You move around. A kitchen like you know what you're doing," he observed. "I should. I've been cooking since I was 10 years old. My mother died young, and my father needed someone to keep house. That must have been hard, taking on those responsibilities so young." Mary paused in her stirring to look at him. "It was what needed to be done. We all do what we have to do." "Yes, I suppose we do." There was something in his tone that made Mary curious. "What about you? Have you always lived on this ranch?" "Born and raised here. My father came out here with nothing but determination and a pregnant wife. He built this place from scratch, one fence post and one cow at a time." "And your mother?" "She died when I was 12. A fever that just wouldn't break. After that, it was just me and my father and my sister until father died 5 years ago." Mary could hear the grief in his voice, even though he was trying to keep his tone matter-of-fact. "I'm sorry. It sounds like you've had your share of loss." "Haven't we all?" Bull was quiet for a moment, then seemed to shake himself out of his somber mood. "What about your husband? Tom, was it?" "Tom Patterson. He was a good man, a hard worker. We met when he came through my town looking for work, and he decided to stay. We had 3 years together before the mine accident. Do you miss him?" The question was asked gently, without any jealousy or awkwardness, just genuine curiosity. Mary considered how to answer it. "I miss the life we had together. I miss having someone to talk to at the end of the day, someone who cared whether I made it home safely. I miss having plans for the future that made sense." "But you don't miss him specifically?" Mary stopped stirring and really thought about the question. "I loved Tom, but if I'm honest, I'm not sure we knew each other very well. We were both young, and we got married quickly because it seemed like the right thing to do. He was kind and reliable. But we never really talked about our dreams or our fears or the things that mattered most to us. That's more honest than most people would be." "Well, this is hardly a normal conversation." Bull laughed, and Mary was surprised by how pleasant the sound was. "No, I suppose it isn't." As they ate the dinner Mary had prepared, their conversation gradually became more natural. Bull told her about the challenges of running the ranch, about the cattle that had personalities as distinct as people, about his hopes for expanding the operation if he could get the water rights he needed. Mary found herself talking about her dreams of maybe teaching children someday, about the books she loved to read when she could get her hands on them, about the garden she had tended behind her little cabin. "You wanted to be a teacher?" Bull asked with interest. "I had some education, more than most girls in my town. I always thought it would be wonderful to help children learn to read and do arithmetic. But teaching jobs are hard to come by, especially for women. There's no school near here, but the town could probably use one. There are more families settling in the area every year. Do you really think so? I know so. I've heard folks talking about it. The nearest school is a 2-day ride away, which means most of the children around here don't get any formal education at all. Mary felt a spark of excitement at the possibility, then reminded herself that she wouldn't be staying long enough for it to matter. Tomorrow night. Mary woke to the sound of roosters crowing and sunlight streaming through the window of her borrowed room. For a moment she forgot where she was and wondered why the light looked different than it did in her little cabin back in Copper Creek. Then reality came flooding back. She was Mrs. William Harrison now, at least on paper, and today she would have to convince Vincent Caldwell that her marriage was real. She dressed quickly in another of Bull's sister's dresses, a green one that was slightly more formal than what she had worn yesterday. When she came downstairs, she found Bull in the kitchen making coffee and looking like he hadn't slept much better than she had. "Good morning," he said, looking up from the stove. "Did you sleep well?" "Well enough." "You look tired." "I've been thinking about tonight, about all the things that could go wrong." Mary poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. "Maybe we should start with all the things that need to go right." Bull sat down across from her with his own coffee. "Fair point. First, we need to act like we've been married long enough to be comfortable with each other. Not like newlyweds, but not like strangers either. How long should we say we've been married? A few months, maybe? Long enough that the novelty has worn off, but not so long that we'd be expected to have children yet." Mary felt her face grow warm at the mention of children, but forced herself to think practically. "That makes sense. And we should stick to the story about me answering your advertisement for a housekeeper." "Right. We can say we got to know each other through letters over the course of several months, and you finally came out here to meet me in person. We fell in love and got married quickly because we didn't want to wait. What about my background? What if he asks specific questions about where I'm from back east?" Bull thought for a moment. "Keep it simple. Small town, your father was a farmer. Your mother died young, so you learned to run a household. You wanted adventure and a new start, so you answered my advertisement. And what about you? What should I know about your background?" "I was born here on the ranch. My father started it with almost nothing, and I've been working it since I was old enough to sit on a horse. My mother died when I was 12. My sister moved away last year when she got married. I've never been married before because I've been too busy building up the ranch." "Why did you decide to get married now?" "Because I was lonely, and because I realized I needed a partner. Someone to help me build something lasting." Mary nodded. It was a simple story, close enough to the truth to be believable. "We should practice talking to each other like we're comfortable together. Right now we're still being too polite, too formal." "You're right. What should I call you?" "Mary seems too formal for a husband. Tom used to call me May sometimes. That might work." "May. I like that." Bull smiled, and Mary noticed that it changed his whole face, making him look younger and less serious. "And you can call me Will. That's what my family called me." "All right, Will." The name felt strange in her mouth, but she supposed she would get used to it. They spent the morning walking around the ranch together, with Bull showing her the operation and Mary asking questions that a wife might ask. She learned about the different breeds of cattle, the seasonal rhythms of ranch work, the challenges of managing the grazing land and water resources. Bull was a good teacher, patient and thorough, and Mary found herself genuinely interested in what he was telling her. "You know more about ranching than I expected," Bull said as they watched some of his men working with horses in the corral. "I told you I grew up on a small ranch. My father raised cattle and horses, though nothing like this scale." "What happened to your father's ranch?" Mary was quiet for a moment, remembering. "He lost it the year before I married Tom. There was a bad winter and he lost too many cattle. He couldn't pay the bank, so they took the land. He died the following spring. I always thought it was from a broken heart as much as anything else." "I'm sorry, that must have been hard to watch." "It was. That's part of why I understand what you're going through with this land deal. Losing something you've worked your whole life to build. It's not just about money, it's about losing a part of yourself." Bull stopped walking and looked at her with surprise. "Most people don't understand that." Most people haven't watched their father lose everything he cared about. They were standing close together, and Mary suddenly became aware that Bull was looking at her like he was seeing something he hadn't noticed before. The intensity of his gaze made her feel self-conscious. "We should probably go back to the house," she said. "Practice some more of our story." But as they walked back toward the house, Mary found herself stealing glances at Bull and wondering what he was thinking. Their conversation had felt more real, more personal than anything they had talked about the night before. She was starting to see glimpses of the man behind the business arrangement. When they reached the house, Bull's foreman, a weathered man named Joe, was waiting for them with a worried expression. "Boss, we need to talk," Joe said. "What's wrong?" "It's about the bank. Mr. Hendricks sent a man out here this morning. Says he needs to see you right away about the loans." Mary saw Bull's face go pale. "What did you tell him?" "Told him you were busy but would try to get to town later this week." "Did he say what it was about?" "No, but he didn't look happy." "And boss? There's something else. I heard talk in town yesterday about Caldwell. Seems like he's having second thoughts about selling that land at all." Bull was quiet for a long moment, and Mary could see him processing this information. "What kind of second thoughts?" "Well, apparently there's been some railroad men sniffing around, asking about land rights in this area. Word is there might be a rail line coming through here in the next few years. If that's true, that land Caldwell owns would be worth a lot more than he was planning to sell it for." Mary felt her stomach sink. If Caldwell was having second thoughts about selling, their whole plan might be pointless. "Thanks for letting me know, Joe. Keep your ears open and let me know if you hear anything else." After Joe left, Bull sank down into one of the chairs on the front porch and put his head in his hands. "This changes things," Mary said, settling into the chair next to him. "It changes everything. If Caldwell doesn't want to sell, it doesn't matter how convincing we are about being married. And if the bank is pressuring me for payment..." He trailed off, but Mary could see the implications. "How bad is your situation with the bank?" Bull was quiet for so long that Mary thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he looked up at her with tired eyes. "Bad. Worse than I told you yesterday. I borrowed heavily to keep the ranch going after the drought last year, and the payments are more than I can handle without expanding the operation. I've been hoping this land deal would give me the water rights I need to run more cattle, which would give me the income to pay off the loans. And if the land deal falls through, I'll lose the ranch, probably within the next few months." Mary stared at him in shock. "Why didn't you tell me this yesterday?" "Because it wouldn't have changed anything. You still needed money, and I still needed a wife to try to convince Caldwell to sell. The only difference is that now you know we're both about to lose everything." Mary got up and walked to the porch railing, looking out at the ranch that Bull was about to lose. It was a beautiful piece of land, well maintained and productive. It seemed wrong that it might be taken away because of circumstances beyond his control. "There has to be something else we can do," she said. "Like what?" "I don't know. But you've put too much work into this place to just give up." Bull joined her at the railing. "Sometimes giving up is the only choice you have left." "I don't believe that. My father gave up and it killed him. You're not going to do the same thing." "What do you suggest?" Mary was quiet for a moment, thinking. "What if we could find another way to get the water rights you need? Are there other properties for sale that include water access?" "Not that I can afford." "What if we could convince Caldwell that selling to you now is better than waiting for the railroad? If a rail line does come through, there will be a lot more development, a lot more people competing for land and water. But if he sells to you now, he gets his money immediately and doesn't have to deal with all the uncertainty." Bull looked at her with surprise. "That's actually not a bad argument. And if he's really committed to only selling to family men, then we make sure he believes our marriage is real. Not just legal, but real." "How do we do that?" Mary turned to face him fully. "We stop acting like strangers who just met. We act like people who chose each other, who care about each other. We make him believe that we're building something together that's worth investing in." Bull studied her face carefully. "That might be harder to fake than you think." "Then maybe we don't fake it." The words hung in the air between them, and Mary wasn't entirely sure what she had meant by them. But as she looked into Bull's eyes, she realized that somewhere between yesterday afternoon and this morning, her feelings about this arrangement had started to change. Mary. Bull started to say something, then stopped as they heard the sound of horses approaching. A group of 3 men on horseback was riding up to the ranch. Even at a distance, Mary could tell that these weren't cowboys or ranch hands. They were dressed too well, and they rode like men who, as the afternoon wore on, Mary could see that Bull was struggling to answer Caldwell's increasingly pointed questions about the ranch's finances. When one of Caldwell's associates asked directly about outstanding debts, Bull's hesitation was noticeable. "Every rancher carries some debt," Bull said carefully. "It's the nature of the business." "Of course," Caldwell replied smoothly. "But some debt loads are more manageable than others. I'm sure you understand that I need to be confident in my buyer's ability to complete the purchase." Mary saw the trap that was being set. If Bull admitted how much trouble he was in, Caldwell would use it as an excuse not to sell. But if he wasn't honest about his situation and Caldwell found out later, it would be even worse. "Mr. Caldwell," Mary said, stepping forward before Bull could respond. "May I speak frankly?" Both Bull and Caldwell looked surprised by her interruption, but Caldwell nodded. "Please do, Mrs. Harrison. You're a businessman, so you understand that every investment involves some risk. Yes, we're carrying debt from last year's drought, but that's exactly why we need the water rights that come with your land. With reliable water access, this ranch can support twice as many cattle as it does now." Mary walked over to the fence overlooking the main pasture, and the men followed her. "Look at this operation, Mr. Caldwell. Look at the condition of the buildings, the health of the cattle, the quality of the fencing. This isn't a failing ranch. This is a ranch that's been carefully managed through difficult times and is positioned for growth." She turned to face Caldwell directly. "My husband could have given up after the drought. A lot of men would have. Instead, he found ways to keep going, to preserve what his father built and position it for the future. That's the kind of man you want as a neighbor, the kind of man you want controlling that water source." Caldwell was listening intently, and Mary pressed on. "You mentioned that there might be railroad development coming to this area. If that's true, then water rights are going to become even more valuable, but they're also going to become more complicated. If you wait, you might find yourself dealing with railroad companies and government officials and all kinds of people who don't understand the land the way ranchers do." "That's an interesting point," one of Caldwell's associates said. "Will and I aren't just buying land," Mary continued. "We're investing in a future together. We're planning to build something that will last for generations. A railroad company or a land speculator might offer you more money eventually, but they won't care about the land itself. They'll use it up and move on." Bull was staring at her with amazement, but Mary kept her focus on Caldwell. "You have a reputation for doing business with people you trust, people who share your values about building lasting enterprises. That's exactly what you're getting with us." Caldwell was quiet for a long moment, looking back and forth between Mary and Bull. "Mrs. Harrison, you make a compelling case, but compelling arguments don't change financial realities. How do I know your husband can actually pay for the land?" Mary felt her heart sink. They had come so far, and now they were back to the same problem they had started with. But then Bull stepped forward, and there was something different in his posture, something more confident. "Mr. Caldwell, my wife is right about everything," she said. "This ranch has been in my family for 15 years, and I've put everything I have into making it successful. I won't lie to you about our financial situation. We've had some hard times, and we're carrying more debt than I'd like." He paused, looking around at the land he had worked so hard to preserve. "But I believe in this place, and I believe in what we can build here. If you're willing to work with me on the terms of the sale, I can make it work. Maybe not all cash up front, but a solid down payment and regular payments that I can meet. What kind of terms are you thinking about?" Bull glanced at Mary, and she gave him an encouraging nod. 20% down with the balance paid over 3 years. I can guarantee the payments with the ranch as collateral." Caldwell considered this. "That's not what I was planning on." "But it's a fair offer," Mary said. "You get steady income over 3 years instead of a lump sum, and you have the security of knowing the ranch backs the deal. If anything goes wrong, you get the land back plus whatever payments have been made. And in the meantime, Bull added, you have neighbors you know and trust, people who will take care of the water source properly and work with you if any issues come up. Caldwell walked a few steps away from them, conferring quietly with his associates. Mary could see them debating something, but she couldn't tell which way the conversation was going. Finally, Caldwell returned to where they were standing. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, you've given me a lot to think about. I have to say I'm impressed with both of you. Your partnership seems genuine, and your commitment to this land is obvious. Mary held her breath, waiting for the but that she was sure was coming. However, Caldwell continued, this isn't the kind of decision I can make on the spot. I need to discuss the terms with my other business partners, and I need to think about whether I'm comfortable with a payment plan instead of a cash sale. Bull's face fell slightly, but he nodded. I understand, sir. When do you think you might have an answer? Give me a week. I'll send word one way or the other by next Friday. As Caldwell and his associates prepared to leave, Mary felt a mixture of disappointment and hope. They had done their best, but it might not have been enough. Mrs. Harrison, Caldwell said as he mounted his horse, I hope you'll be happy here. You've chosen a good man and a good piece of land. Thank you, sir, I believe I have. After the visitors had ridden away, Bull and Mary stood on the porch watching them disappear down the road. Well, Bull said finally, that didn't go exactly as planned. No, but it didn't go badly either. He's considering it at least. Bull turned to look at her. Mary, what you did back there, that was incredible. You saved us. If you hadn't spoken up when you did, he would have walked away without even making an offer. I just told him the truth about what I saw here. You did more than that. You made him believe that we were a real partnership, that we were building something together. Mary felt her cheeks grow warm. Well, we are, aren't we? I mean, for now, at least. Bull was quiet for a moment, studying her face. May, can I ask you something? Of course. When you were talking to Caldwell about our future together, about building something that would last for generations, did you mean that? Mary looked out at the ranch spread before them, at the cattle grazing peacefully in the pastures, at the solid buildings and well-maintained fences. She thought about the morning they had spent walking around together, learning about each other's dreams and fears. She thought about the way Bull had listened to her ideas about convincing Caldwell, the way he had trusted her to help him fight for everything he cared about. I think I did mean it, she said quietly. Bull moved closer to her, close enough that she could see the hope and uncertainty in his eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe this doesn't have to be just a business arrangement. Maybe we could try to make it real. Even if Caldwell decides not to sell, even if I lose the ranch? Mary considered this. You won't lose the ranch. We won't let that happen. There has to be another way, and we'll find it. We. If you want a real partner, Will, then you've got one. Bull reached out and took her hands, just as he had during their wedding ceremony the night before. But this time, the gesture felt different. This time it felt like a choice they were both making freely. May, are you sure about this? Yesterday you were planning to take your money and leave. Now you're talking about staying, about building a life here. That's a big change. Yesterday I was alone in the world with no hope for the future. Today I'm married to a man I respect and admire, standing on land that could be our home. Yes, it's a big change, but maybe it's the kind of change I need. Bull smiled, the same smile that had transformed his face that morning. In that case, Mrs. Harrison, would you like to stay married to me? I think I would, Mr. Harrison. This time, when Bull kissed her, it wasn't for the benefit of a preacher or to maintain their pretense. It was because they both wanted to, and it felt like the beginning of something real. Over the next week, they waited for word from Caldwell while working together to run the ranch. Mary threw herself into learning everything she could about the operation, and Bull found himself relying on her insights and suggestions more than he had expected. She had a good head for numbers and a practical approach to problem solving that complemented his own skills. They also spent time getting to know each other as husband and wife, not just as business partners. They shared meals and evening conversations, and gradually the formality between them gave way to genuine affection and companionship. On Friday morning, a messenger arrived with a letter from Caldwell. Bull and Mary read it together on the front porch. "He's agreed to the payment plan," Bull said, hardly believing what he was reading. "Really?" "Really. 20% down, 3 years to pay the balance, with the ranch as collateral just like we discussed." Mary threw her arms around Bull's neck and he spun her around in celebration. "We did it. We actually did it." "No, you did it. Your speech to Caldwell is what convinced him. We did it together. That's what partners do."